I am nothing but a 1,000-year-old skeleton, forgotten by the world, in another realm. I don't know how many ages have washed over me. Yet somewhere, in that endless span of time, I awakened to a higher form of intelligence. I alone oversee the largest farm in this world. Yet I have a peculiar habit of my own. I only come out to tend the fields under the cover of night. Year after year, the farm yields mountains of grain, yet I have never eaten a single grain. Farming has become the one and only obsession of my existence. Beyond that, I have a passion for collecting the bones of all kinds of skeletons. Who could have known that a sudden turn of events years later would allow me, through the modest stores of food I had quietly accumulated, to transform into a savior revered by all of humanity? My name is Ange, the lowest-ranking farming skeleton in the Undead Empire, and I've been at it for over 1,000 years. Besides me, the farm is home to 79 other dry-bone skeletons just like me. Each of them is responsible for tilling 100 acres of farmland. In their spare time, most of the other skeletons do nothing but lounge around in haystacks or half-heartedly shoo away birds pecking at the crops. As a result, in no more than a decade or so, their bones gradually rot from pest bites until they lose the ability to move altogether. Once the higher beings above take notice, it won't be long before new skeletons are sent to take over, but I am nothing like them. I build shelters out of straw to shield myself from the sun during the day, and I clean and maintain my bones on a regular basis. Not only that, whenever I see a skeleton lose its mobility to decay, I carry it home and add it to my collection. Whenever one of my own bones is on the verge of giving out, I pick through my collected skeletons for a usable replacement and swap it in. In this way, through these methods, I have stubbornly survived all these long years. Then, over 100 years later, I awoke from hibernation one winter to find that the whole world had changed. Not only were the wailing cries of the wraiths gone, but there wasn't a single companion to be found for miles around. Even the higher undead beings who used to patrol the skies had vanished. For the first time, I felt that something was off. Yet no matter how hard I racked my skull, I couldn't figure out what. Looking out at the farm which had fallen into complete ruin, a thought suddenly struck me. Could it be that more skeletons had rotted away? The idea delighted me, and I immediately ran off toward the abandoned sections of the farm. After combing through every last abandoned area, I had collected a total of 79 skeletons. With those remains alone, I made it through another 300 to plus years. All the while, I kept on with my farming duties without pause. Every harvest, I set aside some seeds from the crops. The rest of the grain I stored in an enormous underground vault. Given its sheer size, it would probably take another 1,000 years for me to fill it on my own. Only after the last of my spare skeletons ran out, was I finally forced to leave the farm where I had spent over 500 years. Along the way, I found that the once bustling undead empire was now as eerily silent as the farm itself. Before I knew it, I arrived at the Palace of Rest, the dwelling of the undead king, lord of the dead, and the supreme seat of power in the entire undead empire. By all rights, someone of my lowly station would never be permitted to set foot here. But driven by the instinct to survive, I walked in anyway. After searching the palace grounds for several days, I found not a single living soul, let alone the undead king himself. Fortunately, I did come across a pile of relatively intact skeletons, including several of the higher-grade greybone and whitebone varieties. For a bottom-tier skeleton like me, it was like stumbling upon a treasure trove. I carefully selected a set of intact bone pieces and assembled them into a complete skeleton, then transferred my soul into it. Just like that, I transformed into a higher-grade, greybone skeleton. I had hoped to assemble a silver bone frame instead, but my soul was too weak to power one even if I had. Still, I was more than satisfied. After that, I returned to the farm and got back to work. Ever since becoming a greybone skeleton, my working efficiency had multiplied. Tasks that used to take a full day now only took 5 or 6 hours. In my remaining time, I studied how to use the illusion magic of my scarecrow hat. The scarecrow hat is an artifact capable of casting illusion magic. With just a small infusion of magical energy, it can sustain an illusion for a long time. Unless one possesses a higher spiritual power than the caster, the illusion is nearly impossible to see through. Of course, with such a basic illusion, all I could manage was scaring off the birds on the farm. So far, I had mastered several illusion techniques for disguising my appearance. Before I knew it, another 1,000+ years had gone by. As usual, I loaded the crops into my cart and hauled them to the storehouse. As I pushed along, something in the distance caught my attention. Looking up, I spotted a glowing white archway that had appeared just beyond the fence at the edge of the farm. Thinking the immortal beings had returned, I immediately pushed my cart toward the archway at full speed. After circling the archway several times, I found no trace of any immortal being. Puzzled, I stepped into the very center of the archway. The next second, a blinding flash of light erupted before me. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself in an entirely new world. 2 jagged stone pillars stood in a gray, desolate wasteland, both emitting a faint white glow. Then the glow from the pillars transformed into a leather magical wristband and slipped neatly onto my wrist. Just then, a feeble voice came from behind me. "Why is it a ghost?" I prayed to the undead souls. So why did a ghost show up? I turned around to find a gaunt, emaciated human lying on the ground. One skeletal hand pressed against my foot. The moment the man finished his last word with a grunt of resentment, his head and arm went limp and he passed out. I stood there completely baffled. Was he calling me a human? I was clearly a skeleton. Why would he say that? Then it hit me. I quickly removed my scarecrow hat. I had been maintaining the illusion of a ghost hairstyle the whole time, which was why he had mistaken me for one. I walked over and poked him. After a careful look, I could tell his life force was fading fast. It wouldn't be long before this human was done for. Having never encountered a situation like this before, I felt completely lost and at a loss for what to do. Then a thought flashed through my mind. I still had a cartload of freshly harvested grain. Humans need food, right? Looking at how thin he was, he must have starved himself to this point. Without another thought, I flipped the collapsed human over and stuffed a fistful of grain into his mouth. Then I crouched beside him and watched quietly. After waiting for a good while, there was no sign he was going to swallow any of it. I was puzzled again. Why wasn't he eating? Then I figured it out. Humans can't eat when they're unconscious. Since that was the case, I decided to give him a little more help. I grabbed more grain and shoved it into his mouth with great determination. After my persistent force feeding, the human was finally jolted awake. Gasping and weak, he coughed out the grain that had nearly choked him to death. He managed to tell me that grain needed to be husked and cooked before eating, and that if he didn't get water soon, he would die of thirst. That left me stumped all over again. Where on earth was I supposed to find water for him? And just like that, I spent the entire day lost in thought. So much so that I completely failed to notice the man calling out for help right in front of me multiple times. In the end, this human, staring at a cart overflowing with food, starved to death. The human was gone, and I realized I had no way back. I had no idea how to turn the magical wristband back into the light on the pillars. As for being stranded here, I didn't dwell on it much. This place was no different from the Palace of Rest. The same dead silence, the same desolation. The only difference was that there were other skeletons here. Not long after the human died, a dry-boned skeleton came shuffling in from the distance. It shambled forward, hollow eye sockets fixed on the human's corpse as if drawn to it by something. But when it got to about 30 meters away, the skeleton suddenly stopped in its tracks. It tilted its head with a hint of confusion and turned toward me, hollow sockets landing on my form. The soul flame within its eye sockets flickered wildly. The dry-boned skeleton spun around and shuffled away in the opposite direction even faster than it had come. Skeletons have a hierarchy, and my rank far outclassed this dry-boned skeleton. One look was enough to send it running, and so I stayed where I was, and over the course of the afternoon, I scared off more than a dozen skeletons. It was as if the dry-bone and white-bone skeletons had all gotten the memo and redrawn their territory boundaries. Not a single lower-ranking skeleton wandered my way again. I dug a pit and settled in temporarily. The grain from my cart I buried in a separate hole, and I must say, I dig a solid pit. As evening fell, I noticed that the wandering skeletons in the distance were all simultaneously digging holes and burying themselves. Then the wind began to blow. This was the repose wind, the very force at the root of all life that takes shape in the land of death. It breathes life into the countless scattered corpses, bones, and soul fragments across the land, nurturing them into skeletons, corpse shamans, and undead. But show it the slightest disrespect, and it will destroy everything without mercy. For undead beings, prolonged exposure to the repose wind causes the soul to slowly congeal and wither, then fade into nothing. Not even the mightiest golden skeleton Lich King is exempt. The only difference is they last longer. I lay in my sunken pit, listening to the howl of the repose wind as my soul slowly settled into calm. The repose wind has a soothing effect on the soul. As long as it doesn't hit you head on, it won't harm your soul. Lying in the pit, I curiously extended one finger into the cold, biting wind. The mist-gray repose wind swept over my finger, swirling into tiny vortexes, and my entire hand slowly turned a metallic silver white beneath its touch. As the wind blew, a cool, eerie sensation crept from my palm all the way down into the flame of my soul. It gave me a feeling of immense growth, as if I were consuming a soul. The sensation jolted me to attention. For a skeleton like me, the best way to grow stronger is to devour the souls of others of our kind. But I was just a farming skeleton. Growing my soul had never been a priority. Besides, I was the only one left in the Palace of Rest now, with no kin left to prey on. Yet growing stronger is the instinct of every soul. Once I had tasted it, I couldn't stop. I stretched out both hands. The night passed, and dawn began to creep in. The repose wind died down, and I could feel my soul had grown considerably more solid. How much stronger it was, I couldn't say, but my bones had changed dramatically. Many of the pits and cracks were gone, larger holes had shrunk, and smaller ones had filled in completely, as if someone had gone over them with putty. A few more nights of this wind and I might not need to swap bones at all, I thought to myself. Climbing out of the pit, I found that yesterday's human corpse had disappeared. Looking up, I saw he had been reborn as a zombie, shambling unsteadily away in another direction. I ran over and dragged him back. The little zombie was terrified, thinking I was going to eat him, and struggled and howled. But if even dry bone and white bone skeletons ran from me in fear, a freshly born zombie stood no chance. I quickly stripped him of everything he had. His belongings were all human items: a leather satchel, an empty canteen, a long sword, and inside the satchel, a map and a few silver coins. Nothing that could identify who he was, meaning why this human had come here, and how he had activated the teleportation formation, would likely remain a mystery forever. If I couldn't figure out how to use the magical wristband myself, I might never be able to go back. Looking at how much smoother my bones had become, maybe being stuck here wasn't such a bad thing after all. Thanks to the repose wind, I settled properly into this wasteland. Every night, I bathed in the repose wind and steadily strengthened my soul. The little newborn zombie gradually warmed up to me. At first, when I dragged him away, he was half scared to death, convinced he was about to be eaten. But after I stripped him of everything, I simply ignored him. The little zombie wandered aimlessly, dazed at his lucky escape. When the repose wind picked up, a newborn like him had no way to withstand its ferocity. He instinctively dug frantically at the ground, trying to dig a hole to hide in, but at the rate he was going, the wind would scatter his soul long before the hole was done. Luckily, my pit wasn't far away. I pushed through the wind and dragged him in. My presence was far too overwhelming for the little zombie. Crouching in the same pit together, he felt the crushing pressure and howled as he scrambled to get out, but the moment he poked his head out, the icy wind drove him right back. He ended up huddled at the far edge of the pit, clutching his head and trembling. I paid him no mind, reaching my hand out on my own to channel that cool, eerie energy. Come daybreak, when the repose wind died down, the little zombie couldn't wait to crawl out. This time, he made up his mind to stay well away from this terrifying place. But barely 30 meters out, another wandering skeleton chased him right back. This 30-meter radius had become my territory. The little zombie was free to stay within it. I wouldn't bother him. But the moment he stepped outside, his newborn soul was the most tender and tempting prey around, and anyone could bully him. After being chased off a few times by other skeletons, the little zombie came to realize that everywhere else was far more dangerous than here. When evening fell and the repose wind rose again, the little zombie, unable to dig his own pit, crept back into mine, stiff-necked and eyeing me warily. Seeing that I ignored him, he scooted in a little. I still ignored him, so he scooted in a little more. He worked his way back to the same corner he'd been in the night before. Same curled up pose, only this time, his head wasn't trembling anymore. The next morning, he scrambled out again as eagerly as ever, but by evening, he crawled back into the pit before the repose wind had even begun, no longer clutching his head. This time, he watched me with curiosity. He even tried to imitate me, extending his palm out of the pit. Of course, that reckless move put his soul through a brutal baptism of icy energy. Under my shelter, the little zombie grew steadily, safely passing through his newborn phase and becoming a flesh-skinned zombie, the lowest rank of zombie. He was the same rank as a dry-bone skeleton, but the layer of flesh gave him higher defense and greater combat power. Then one day, the little zombie dragged a dry-bone skeleton back to the pit and shoved it in front of me. I tilted my head. The little zombie nodded and nudged the skeleton's skull toward me. I shook my head. The dry-bone skeleton's soul was too weak. Devouring it would probably grow me slower than a single night in the repose wind. The little zombie hung his head and dragged the skeleton away, crestfallen. After that, every dry-bone skeleton in the area paid the price. Not a single one escaped the little zombie's wrath. Whenever he ran into a white-boned skeleton he couldn't handle, he retreated back into my territory. Within 30 meters of here, even white-boned skeletons dared not enter. Despite the little zombie's relentless hunting nearby, the surrounding ecosystem wasn't disrupted. The empty spots were quickly filled by skeletons drifting in from elsewhere. The discarded skeletons the little zombie left behind, after one night under the repose wind, could easily birth new souls, such as the eternal cycle of undead existence. The only thing truly changing was the strength of my soul, and the little zombies. If nothing else had happened, I might have stayed in that pit forever, just like I farmed for over 1,000 years without a second thought. But then, something unexpected happened. One day, the little zombie came bolting back into the pit and shoved me frantically, and pointed wildly outside. A gash deep enough to show bone had appeared on the little zombie's face. Whatever had made it had hit hard. I poked my head out, and saw a gray bone skeleton leading over 20 lower-ranking skeletons charging straight into my territory. Being a gray bone skeleton myself, I held no rank advantage over it, and with its leadership, the lower-ranking skeletons were ignoring the normal hierarchy entirely. Had the little zombie gone and poked a hornet's nest? Without another word, I grabbed the little zombie and bolted out of the pit. I didn't think I could handle a same-rank gray bone skeleton and its crew of 20+. We ran, and the gray bone skeleton led the charge in pursuit. What did you do? Once we were temporarily safe, I let out a breath and reached out with my soul to ask. The little zombie stared at me blankly. His intelligence wasn't nearly high enough to answer that. Fine. I gave up. The skeletons back at the farm were always the same. Ask them anything and they'd just stare back at you like that. The little zombie was already ahead of the curve. At least when he was being chased, he had the sense to come back and warn me. If he hadn't run back, the gray bone skeleton would have only gone after him. This had nothing to do with me. Look what you dragged me into. I knocked him on the skull. Because of the little zombie's reckless troublemaking, I was driven out of my pit for several months. It was almost dark. I needed to find shelter fast. Going back wasn't an option. I dug a pit on the spot and we both ducked in. The hole was shallow, so I had to pile dirt from around it on top of us both. The next day, the moment the wind stopped, I crawled out. I dug another pit a few meters away and tossed the little zombie into it. He decided not to let the little zombie shelter in his pit anymore, to avoid being dragged into trouble again in the future. But that very night, when the wind had barely begun, a little head appeared peeking over the edge of my pit, and seeing I didn't chase him off, the little zombie slid right in. The next day I tossed him out again. At night he came right back, like a game. The cycle didn't stop until I dug a tunnel between the two pits. Whenever he came over again, I'd kick him into the tunnel and let him crawl back on his own. I'm an easygoing skeleton. Without anyone telling me what to do, I farmed for over 1,000 years without complaint. Now that I'd been chased out of my safe pit, I didn't mind much either. I dug a new pit, bigger and more secure than the last, and spent my days nestled in it, channeling the repose wind. The little zombie was far more energetic than me. The moment the wind stopped, he was off. The lower-ranking skeletons nearby suffered his wrath once again. His soul, at least, kept growing stronger through all this non-stop activity. I thought today would be like any other, but not long after the wind picked up, I heard footsteps, and before I knew it, someone slid down into my pit. It was a human in a cloak, somewhere in his 40s or 50s, weathered and road-worn, holding an ornate staff and radiating a powerful surge of magical energy. A human mage. He spotted me in the pit with surprise. A skeleton? What's a skeleton doing up on the slope? Excuse me, sorry to intrude, mind if I shelter here from the wind? The human mage said it almost as an afterthought. It's common knowledge that skeletons don't develop true intelligence until they reach the golden rank. Ordinary skeletons act mostly on instinct, and when they sense a threat they attack. For all he knew, the skeleton in front of him might lunge at him any moment. But a human mage bold enough to walk through the land of death wasn't about to be intimidated by a mere gray-boned skeleton. He calmly removed his hood and gestured outside. A massive skull dipped into the pit, instantly filling every remaining inch of space. It was an ancient bone horse, its hollow eye sockets glowing with a deep blue soul flame. The pit was barely big enough for one skeleton, one human, and the head of a bone horse. There was no room to even turn around. I shuffled back to the tunnel entrance connecting the two pits to give them more space. Why would a human mage appear here during the repose wind? Was the wind not affecting him? And even if it wasn't, how was his ancient bone horse managing to endure it? I soon found out. The human mage glanced at me with curiosity first, confirming I had no intention of attacking, then reached out and placed his hand on the bone horse's skull. Wisps of black smoke rose from his palm and seeped into the bone horse through its hollow eye sockets, nostrils, and other openings. Wherever the smoke passed, the bone horse's skeleton slowly lightened in color. It was only then that I noticed the bone horse had already been eroded by the repose wind. Traces of decay had begun to appear on its surface. The repose wind works in a strange way. If a set of bones possesses a soul, the wind will erode it. But if the bones are soulless, the wind actually protects them instead, slowing their decay, and may even nurture a new soul flame within them, giving rise to a new skeleton. The bone horse had a soul flame, so its bones were being eroded, but those traces of erosion slowly faded under the soothing touch of the black smoke. Now I understood how the bone horse could walk through the repose wind. The human mage had been continuously healing it, but that must have been an enormous drain on his magical power. Once the black smoke had covered the bone horse's skull, the mage seemed to remember something. He slapped his forehead and muttered in frustration, "What was I thinking?" He reached out and twisted the bone horse's skull clean off. With the soul flame sealed inside the skull, the skeleton left outside the pit lost its soul flame. The repose wind could no longer harm it. Cradling the skull, the mage gave me a sheepish grin. "Lost track of time on the road. Good thing you had this pit, otherwise we'd have been done in by that cursed wind. By the way, what are you doing up on this slope? This isn't really skeleton territory. All broken rock up here, not easy to dig in." I stared at the mage with my hollow eye sockets, saying nothing but thinking, this isn't skeleton territory? Come to think of it, that seemed right. Once the terrain rose, the skeletons disappeared. Even the little zombie had to go all the way down to the flatlands below to find others to pick on. Seeing my blank expression, the mage chuckled. "Don't mind me. Spend enough time out in the middle of nowhere with no one to talk to and your social skills start to go. So I try to strike up a conversation with whoever I meet, no matter what kind of reaction I get." The mage launched into a one-sided conversation almost like he was talking to himself. "This road is getting harder and harder to travel. Do you know what this road used to be called? The Golden Road, the Twin Road, the Cypress Road. That basin down below used to be the world's great transit hub for the Undead Empire. Now it's just a stomping ground for little skeletons like you. Ever since the Undead Empire disappeared, business along this road has gotten harder and harder. Back then you could open any little roadside stall and make a fortune. Look at me now, half a month of back and forth travel, and I might not even bring in enough to cover 2 months of food. I honestly envy you. No need to eat, no need to drink. Only undead beings like you can actually survive out here. If only the teleportation channel could be reopened. Grain from the Undead Empire flowing in, goods flowing out, the roads open again. Everyone would be able to make a good living. Come to think of it, you undead don't even eat, so why did they produce so much grain?" Ah, there I go again being dense. Not all undead belong to the Undead Empire. It's been nearly 1,000 years. The skeletons that belong to the Empire have probably all faded away by now. The mage was using me as little more than a hollow tree to talk at. He expected no response, just rambled on freely. Most of it went over my head, but those last two parts, I understood those clearly. Why would undead beings who don't eat produce so much grain? Because it was all grown by farming skeletons like me. At the end of his rambling, the mage let out a long sigh. The underground city has been hit by disaster again. If they can't find a new food source soon, another wave of people will starve. I hope this time the teleportation channel opens. I hope the Undead Empire is still out there. The mage spoke as if making a wish. When he was done, he glanced over at me sitting quietly and gave a self-deprecating smile. Then he pulled his cloak over himself and slowly drifted off to sleep. Despite the mage's seemingly unguarded appearance, I could sense the soul fluctuations from the bone horse's skull sweeping over me from time to time. Not that I had any intention of causing trouble even without the bone horse keeping watch. I was just a small farming skeleton, not a troublemaker like the little zombie. I had blocked the tunnel between the two pits precisely because of this concern. I was worried that if the little zombie heard something, He'd crawl over and stir things up. The next day, the moment the wind died down, the mage woke up. He scrubbed his face vigorously with both hands. That would have to pass for washing up. Once fully alert, he gave me a surprised look and smiled. Now there's a quiet skeleton. Don't see many your type. Hope you're still alive next time I come through. A surprisingly earnest kind of wish. Skeletons in this area cycled through fast. With a few more active types like the little zombie around, the turnover would be even quicker. I was already about as low-key as a skeleton could get, and I still ended up with a mage dropping in on me. Thankfully, this one had no ill intent. If it had been a different kind of predator, I'd have been in serious trouble. So still alive next time wasn't as easy a goal as it sounded. It really did take a fair bit of luck. The mage climbed out of the pit and snapped the bone horse's skull back onto its body. With a sharp hiss, a jet of blue flame burst from the horse's nostrils as it scrambled back to its feet. The mage led the bone horse forward a couple of steps, then suddenly remembered something and turned back. How terribly rude of me. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Esk, a traveling merchant on the Golden Road, and also a necromancer. Esk gave a slight bow and nodded in my direction, then set off toward the plain at the foot of the slope. I watched Esk's retreating figure, then looked in the direction he was heading. The soul flame in my eyes flickered a few times. I'm not sure what came over me, but I climbed out of the pit and followed along at a distance behind Esk. Esk hadn't gone far before he noticed me. He stopped. So did I. He walked forward, and I followed, always keeping the same distance between us. That shameless persistence was straight out of the little zombie's playbook. Without realizing it, I had picked up his habits. Esk laughed despite himself, shook his head, and stopped paying me any attention. Once we descended the slope, skeletons became more plentiful, but the lower-ranking ones were all scared off by the bone horse. We moved unimpeded until we reached the pit I had originally dug. A gray-boned skeleton crawled out of the pit, the very one that had led the charge to chase me and the little zombie that day. It had clearly discovered the advantages of the pit and claimed it for itself. The other skeletons had been scared off by the bone horse, but not this gray-bone. It crawled to the surface, arched its body, unhinged its jaw, and let out a soul-rattling shriek. The area around the pit seemed to stir in response, and a dozen lower-ranking skeletons crawled out one after another. Unlike the last time we were chased, the Greybone's crew was far smaller, barely a dozen left. Several of them had dents on their faces from being struck. I strongly suspected the little zombie's handiwork. Ever since that chase where his face was gashed, the little zombie had developed a particular fondness for smashing others in the face. Several of the skeletons he'd dragged back had similar dents on their cheeks. The little zombie had been out from dawn till dusk lately. Surely he hadn't been picking off the Greybone's followers one by one. Someone had trespassed on its territory, and the Greybone skeleton was furious. It drew its bone blade to drive us away while its followers surged forward. The bone horse was actually only at whitebone rank, one level below the greybone, but its sheer size gave it several times the bulk. In theory, its combat power shouldn't be any weaker. Yet the bone horse didn't move to engage. Instead, it neatly stepped behind Esk. Esk stepped forward with a sweep of his staff, and an invisible force immediately took hold in the space between him and the skeletons. The skeletons' soul flames were ripped out of their skulls strand by strand almost instantly, and drawn into his palm. My soul clenched at the sight. What kind of magic was this? The extracted soul flames condensed in Esk's palm into two distinct balls of soul fire. He rapidly muttered an incantation, too low for me to make out. Then Esk flung the two soul flames to the ground, and they erupted upward. Two wraiths burst from the blazing soul fire and lunged straight at the Greybone skeleton. The Greybone swung its bone blade at the wraiths, cleaving clean through the center of one, but the split wraith was completely unharmed. It passed right through the blade and merged back together, latching onto the Greybone skeleton. The skeleton reached out and grabbed the wraith, somehow managing to seize the incorporeal creature. The wraith struggled to break free, then thrust out both claws and clawed frantically at the Greybone's eye sockets, where the soul flame burned within. The Greybone seemed alarmed, twisting its head to evade the clawing, while its other arm swung into a fist, hammering blow after blow into the wraith's form. The incorporeal wraith let out agonized shrieks with each hit, and was ultimately beaten into oblivion. The Greybone skeleton had killed one wraith, and continued grappling with the other, buying Esk all the time he needed. He made a grasping motion with his left hand, the same as before. The Greybone skeleton's soul was forcibly wrenched free and dissolved into a mass of soul fire. He chanted rapidly, then flung it to the ground. The erupting soul fire spread outward like ripples on water. Wherever it touched something, it became a pair of claws that locked onto it and pinned it in place. The claws were flimsy. I felt I could break free, but the lower-ranking skeletons couldn't. They were locked firmly in place and turned into sitting targets. Esk cast spell after spell. Shadow arrows pierced through the skeleton's eye sockets, shattering the soul flames within their skulls. By the time the Greybone skeleton had destroyed both wraiths, it looked up to find its dozen-odd followers had been reduced to a scattered pile of bones. Alone now, the Greybone was no match for Esk. He hurled a ball of black flame straight at its skull. The entire skull erupted in flames, and when the fire faded, the skull was physically intact, but the soul within had been completely extinguished. And just like that, the Greybone skeleton's entire faction was wiped out by Esk with effortless ease. And clearly he hadn't even broken a sweat. The bone horse, which could have taken the Greybone on alone, hadn't lifted a hoof. Esk showed no excitement whatsoever, as if he'd simply wrapped up a minor errand. He glanced back at me, then led the bone horse toward the direction of the stone pillars. Reaching my old pit meant we weren't far from the 2 stone pillars of the spatial gateway. Arriving at the pillars, Esk got to work without a word. He pulled several blue crystals from a pouch at his waist and embedded them into specific spots on the pillars. Then he stepped before the pillars and knelt solemnly. Under his reverent bow, the 2 stone pillars slowly began to glow. They lit up, but no magical effect appeared. Esk circled the pillars several times, but nothing unusual happened. His disappointment was palpable. He let out a long, heavy sigh. He pried out the crystals he had inserted, and the pillars went dark again. I watched from a distance. Seeing Esk fail, I glanced down at my wrist. The magic had ultimately become my wristband. Could it be that the wristband was what was needed to open the teleportation channel? Watching Esk remove the crystals and the pillars go dark again, I realized that the key to getting home very likely lay in those crystals. The crystals he removed had shrunk noticeably compared to when he'd first installed them. Esk blew on them with a pained expression, then tucked them back into his satchel and retraced his steps. As he passed me, Esk shrugged, his expression a picture of bitter resignation. Failed again. Still can't open it. Maybe we should start learning to live like you. My way of living? Farming? I tilted my head and fell into step behind him again. Noticing I was still tailing him, Esk laughed in spite of himself. Still following me? Planning to come back to the underground city with me? Well, fine. The wilderness is too dangerous anyway. Next time I come through, you might already be gone. If you want to follow, go ahead. I tilted my head. It felt like Esk had misunderstood. The underground city? Did the underground city have blue crystals? When we were nearly back at the pit, I spotted the little zombie from a distance, crouched in front of my pit and howling. He had woken up to find me gone, and immediately stopped going out. He just stayed outside the pit and wailed, maybe thinking that if he yelled loud enough, I'd show up. Sure enough, I appeared, and the little zombie leapt up with excitement, howling and charging toward me, refusing to leave my side no matter what. So Esk kept walking, I kept following, and now there was a little tail behind me, the little zombie trotting along right on my heels. One human, one bone horse, one skeleton, one zombie, a strange little group. They made their way up the slope all the way to the very top. On the other side stretched a boundless wasteland, flat, desolate, without end. We walked in one direction the whole way, from morning until late afternoon. At that point, the mage said seriously, "It's almost time for the repose wind to rise." Then suddenly, what had looked like perfectly flat ground ahead revealed itself to be a deep gash in the earth, as though the land had been split open with a blade. At the sight of it, Esk's face broke into a wide grin. "I thought we weren't going to make it, and we'd have to spend another night out in the open. Come on, the underground city is just ahead." Just as our group entered the ravine, the wind on the wasteland above began to pick up, but blocked by the edges, the wind inside the ravine died down significantly, offering a shelter effect much like a pit. I tilted my head up and felt the fierce wind howling past overhead. The chill was far more intense than in the pit. Channeling that cold energy here would probably be even more effective than in the pit. Esk glanced back at me. "Keep up. That cursed wind will blow you both away if you're not careful." Having said his piece, Esk slipped back into his habit of talking to no one in particular. "This used to be a great river, you know. The river hit volcanic rock here and seeped underground, carving out a massive subterranean cavity. Our underground city is built inside that cavity. It's the only reason we're still here. Otherwise, we'd have all been killed by that wretched wind long ago," Esk muttered on, expecting nothing in return. Just as he had said, spending whole days traversing the wasteland with no one to talk to had given him the habit of talking to anything and everything. He used to talk to his bone horse, now talking to a skeleton was no different. And he had a feeling, this little skeleton seemed to actually understand him, at least more than his dim-witted bone horse. I listened in silence, taking in my surroundings. Perhaps because the repose wind was kept out, the environment inside the ravine was far better than outside. There were even shrubs growing in the corners. Moss clung to the shaded sides of the rocks, and insects could be seen moving about here and there. A stone in the shrubs ahead caught my attention. A black mist that was barely visible to the naked eye coiled around the stone, and as it noticed me looking, the mist stirred and slowly condensed into a human face. That's Blackface, a specter, an old warlock Phylan's pet. "Blackface, these are some new friends I'm bringing back. Don't go scaring them," Esk said by way of introduction. The face formed from mist had 2 deep voids where its eyes should have been. They lingered on me and the little zombie for a moment, then dissolved back into a wisp of mist that wrapped itself around the stone again. We continued down, and in the side of the ravine's base was a crack, over 10 meters wide and 4 to 5 meters tall. The entrance to the underground city. At the entrance stood a person holding an ornate staff, craning their neck to peer up into the ravine. This was an extremely gaunt person. The skin visible beyond their clothing was completely dull, shriveled and wrinkled. The muscles dried out as if all moisture had been drained from them, with no elasticity at all. Sunken eye sockets, prominent cheekbones. They looked exactly like a dried out corpse, and indeed that was precisely what they were. Spotting the figure, Esk called out a greeting from a distance. "Phylan, what are you doing out here? Don't tell me you came to meet me. That's quite the welcome." This was indeed the owner of the specter from before, old warlock Phylan. Phylan offered a gentle smile. "Blackface saw you were coming back. I came to check on things. Any luck?" the old warlock asked carefully. But Esk knew what he was really asking. He just didn't want to put too much pressure on him. Esk forced a smile and shook his head. "Nothing. They're short on food too. Wouldn't sell." Phylan gave a somewhat disappointed nod. "That's to be expected. Places that can grow food are getting fewer and fewer. No one's got enough these days. If they sold to us, some of their own would starve. Don't take it to heart. This isn't on you." you. S gave an awkward laugh. Since I couldn't buy any grain, I made a trip to the Sea of the Departed. But the teleportation channel still wouldn't open. The magic crystals shrank again though. Phylon listened without much concern, though a trace of disappointment crossed his face. Still can't open it? That's to be expected. It's been 1,000 years. Who knows what's become of the Palace of Rest? I hope His Majesty is at peace. Let the crystals shrink. You couldn't buy food anyway, and crystals aren't exactly edible. Don't worry about it. You've had a long journey. Go rest, Phylon said warmly. That gentleness was what made Esk's eyes redden. He sniffled, and as he walked past Phylon, he managed a strange smile. I ran into a quiet skeleton at the Sea of the Departed. He followed me back on his own. I suspect he might actually understand what I'm saying, like he has real intelligence. Esk's words drew Phylon's gaze over to me. He looked me over with casual disinterest until his eyes landed on my wrist. His entire body jolted, and his eyes flew wide with disbelief. Esk had already walked through the entrance and missed Phylon's reaction entirely. Phylon stumbled toward me, carelessly dropping his ornate staff on the ground without a second thought. His trembling hands reached forward as if to take my hand, but he caught himself halfway and quickly pulled back, looking utterly flustered and at a loss. If Esk hadn't already gone inside, seeing the normally composed old warlock in this state would have made his jaw drop. Phylon took a long moment to collect himself, then looked at me with eyes full of hope. Are you the new Watcher? The Watcher? What was that? I tilted my head, staring at the old warlock in confusion. My emotion was genuine puzzlement, but I was a skeleton, and eye sockets don't convey emotions. To the old warlock, my head tilt looked more like stern disapproval. He startled and immediately clapped both hands over his mouth. I said nothing, I know nothing. Phylon's muffled voice came out in a hollow murmur, but his previously cloudy eyes had come alive, shining as if lit from within by hope. Phylon's baffling behavior left me thoroughly confused. I stood rooted to the spot, staring at him blankly. But that blankness read very differently to Phylon. The Watcher is displeased. His heart seized. He realized he'd lost composure and quickly rubbed his face to bring his expression back to normal. He retrieved his staff from the ground, smoothed his clothing, and finally straightened his back. His manner was still slightly stiff, but the fluster of a moment ago was no longer visible. S came back from the entrance. What's going on, City Lord? This is just a little fellow. Don't tell me you scared him? Little fellow? Phylon's heart skipped. He shot me a cautious glance. Seeing no reaction from me, he let out a quiet breath of relief. Indeed, a very quiet companion, he said, stepping aside, while inwardly roaring, little fellow? His age could dwarf your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's, and you dare call him a little fellow? Phylon's inexplicable behavior was making me uneasy, so I moved quickly toward Esk. Esk gave Phylon a puzzled look but couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. He turned to me instead. Don't be afraid. Phylon's a good person. There's just a soul suppression between undead beings. You'll get used to it. Through this door is the underground city. It's safe in there. No predators to worry about. As long as you don't go attacking people at random, you can live there until your bones crumble to dust. Find yourself a spot you like and settle in. Come find me if you need anything. Esk rambled on at length and led me away. Phylon wiped away a cold sweat that wasn't there, let out a long breath, then quickly broke into an expression of barely contained excitement. The Watcher has appeared. The underground city is saved. If Phylon hadn't been a warlock who had lived for over 1,000 years, if he hadn't worked at the World Transit Hub, he would never have known what a Watcher was. The Watcher is the keeper of the teleportation channels, an observer and guardian of the world. It isn't an official title, just an informal name agreed upon by those in the know within the World Transit Hub, and one the Watcher has never officially acknowledged. The Watcher has no fixed form, sometimes a skeleton, sometimes a zombie, sometimes even a specter. But the one shared trait is that they always bear a leather magical wristband. The lack of a fixed form indicates that what appears is not the Watcher's true self, but a projection of their consciousness. The Watcher, existing somewhere else entirely, projects their consciousness into a temporary vessel to observe and protect the World Transit Hub. Because of the limitations of the vessel, the Watcher's combat power is never great and has occasionally been killed by bored troublemakers. But it doesn't matter. It's only a temporary vessel, and destroying it causes the Watcher no real harm. The ones who killed the vessel, however, would have to face the Watcher's wrath. The most furious incident saw a full unit of powerful Black Knights sent through the teleportation channel. A full 12 Black Knights, who slaughtered every last one of the 400-strong demon merchant guild that had harmed the Watcher. From that point on, no one ever dared casually kill those unremarkable-looking skeletons and zombies again, unless the skeleton or zombie attacked first. Many believe the Watcher was most likely a projection of the king himself. Otherwise, how could anyone command an entire unit of Black Knights? Of course, all of that was nearly 1,000 years ago. Since the World Transit Hub closed, this barren and desolate death world had gradually reverted to what it had always truly been. Without the Undead Empire's transit trade, the economy had collapsed, food production had dropped, and the population had plummeted. The survivors had retreated into a handful of underground cities, barely scraping by, and now even that was becoming impossible. Food production in the underground city had declined year by year, and even the current population of over 5,000 might no longer be sustainable. Without a new food source, 2/3 of the underground city's population could starve, a catastrophe of terrifying proportions. Phylon had done everything he could to prevent this, sending several delegations to other underground cities to purchase grain, but every single one was turned away, understandably so. Their own city wasn't the only one running short. The other cities were in the same situation population. Selling food to others would mean their own people starved. Under normal circumstances, Phelan would have launched a war by now, mobilizing every resource in the underground city to seize what others had. But the Repose Wind made that impossible. No underground city could wage war while the Repose Wind raged. With war off the table, the only option left might be an undead calamity. And then, at this most critical moment, the Watcher appeared. What did that mean? It meant the World Transit Hub might reopen, and even if it didn't, someone of the Watcher's abilities could solve a food shortage with ease. They wouldn't have to take that final, terrible step. The thought lit a flame of hope on Phelan's face. Wind elementals wrapped around his body and carried him, feet never touching the ground, gliding back into the underground city. Past a dim tunnel, the view opened up dramatically. A gently sloping expanse stretched into a vast underground space, with homes carved from the rock lining both sides of two main roads. Oil lamps flickered along the main roads for light, and all manner of beings walked and talked along them. A surprisingly bustling scene. Esk, walking ahead, turned back and said, "Alright, you're safe in here. As long as you don't attack anyone, no one will hurt you. May your soul rest easy. See you around." With that, Esk stepped onto a wooden cable line and glided across toward the opposite cliff face. Esk had already spoken with Phelan upon returning, but Phelan wasn't the only leader of the underground city, so he still needed to report to the others. And just like that, the little zombie and I were left behind. I watched Esk drift further and further away along the cable line, feeling a little lost. A clacking sound drew my attention. I turned to see a white-boned skeleton carrying a wooden crate on its back, filled with chunks of coal, climbing up the stone steps. The little zombie's eyes lit up. He opened his mouth wide and lunged forward. Back in the Sea of the Departed, he had spent every day out hunting skeletons from dawn till dusk. Today he had walked all day without catching a single thing. He was starving. I grabbed him by the collar and stopped him in his tracks. Esk had said more than once, "Don't attack others." Skeletons probably counted as others. I dragged the little zombie along and headed downward. The path grew more crowded. Many skeletons and zombies moved about, carrying crates, turning winches, hauling water, all manner of repetitive tasks. Looking at them, I saw a reflection of myself. I too was built for repetitive work, farming. With so many skeletons and zombies around, the little zombie and I blended right in. The people on the road didn't spare us a glance, each absorbed in their own tasks, though I couldn't help noticing that every face carried a look of deep worry. It was the first time I had ever seen so many different kinds of beings. Humans like Esk, minotaurs with great bovine heads, cave dwellers with long arms who walked on all fours, succubi covered in goat hide but with strikingly voluptuous figures. All sorts of beings, more than I could name. But by far the most numerous were the skeletons and zombies, who handled nearly all of the repetitive labor, operating cable lines, carrying water, transporting goods. I held the little zombie's hand and wandered without direction, gradually drifting into quieter and more secluded areas. Eventually, in some out-of-the-way corner of the sprawling underground city, I found a patch of soft, flat earth and stopped. The reason I stopped was the soil, soft, fertile, and moist. As a farming skeleton, I have a keen sense for soil, and I can tell at a glance what land is good for growing things. The soil here was fertile, yes, but far too wet, and there was no sunlight. Even the farm at the Palace of Rest had sunlight. Down here there was none. But no sunlight didn't mean no plants. Growing on the rock walls at the edge of the area was a kind of glowing moss. That didn't surprise me. If moss could grow in a sewer, it could certainly grow in an underground city without sunlight. It had been several months since I was transported here, and I hadn't planted anything in a long time. Seeing the soft soil and a living plant growing nearby, the farming instinct etched into my very soul began to stir. No sunlight meant no need to hide from it. No repose wind meant no need to dig a pit. I took in my surroundings. Then I set about gathering the glowing moss from around the area. While I was collecting moss, a fierce argument erupted in the underground city's council chamber. The argument was mainly between two people, the succubus Lena and the goblin Craig. The cause? Esk had failed to buy grain, and the underground city now faced a life-or-death crisis that demanded a final decision. Lena said furiously, "Your proposal is inhumane, heartless, and immoral. Drive those people out into the wilderness and they're dead. You'd be killing them." Craig replied with infuriating calm, "I'm not a person, so why would I have humanity? Driving out a portion of the population is for the sake of keeping the rest alive. Isn't that the most moral thing to do? If we don't, this time next year, every single one of us will be dead." Lena shot back, "That's sophistry. What gives you the right to decide who gets driven out, how many, and who gets to stay? You have no such authority." Craig said flatly, "I'm not the one deciding the numbers. The food is. However many people our food supply can sustain, that's who stays. The rest get driven out to fend for themselves. Otherwise our food runs out and we all die." Lena said, "We can work harder. Keep the magic lamps burning longer. Everyone pitches in more magic, we pull together as one. We can get through this." "And what about next year?" Craig said dismissively. "This world was never meant to support many people. We only made it this long because of the wealth left behind by the Undead Empire's World Transit Hub. That bought us another 1,000 years. Now we've truly run out of road. We shouldn't fight this fate. Let things return to where they were always meant to be." Craig paused, then added, "If we drive out the lower value population now, we can still be selective. Keep more of the high-value individuals. Once the food is gone, there's no selection to be made. Noble mages will starve just the same as cave dwellers. Brilliant goblin engineers will rot just like those succubi who do nothing but preen and beguile. Now that would be a real waste." He managed to get a dig in at the succubi even mid-argument. Lena's patience snapped and she turned to Phylan. "Lord Phylan, Craig's proposal is both absurd and cruel. I ask that you exercise your veto and strike it down." Phylan nodded. "Indeed, it is too cruel. However, Lena, if it were up to me, I would recommend an undead calamity." "What?" The moment Phylan finished speaking, not just Lena and and Craig, but everyone in the entire council chamber froze in shock. As the name implied, an undead calamity was a catastrophe unleashed by the undead to transform everyone into undead. In other words, killing every living being in the underground city. That was far crueler than Craig's proposed expulsion, and Phylan was entirely capable of carrying it out. Every undead being in the city answered to Phylan. The moment he decided to act, the undead calamity could begin. For a moment, everyone thought they had misheard. Lena especially couldn't believe the always kind and gentle Lord Phylan said something so terrifying. Instinctively looking for an excuse on his behalf, she asked, "Does Lord Phylan mean to reincarnate everyone as warlocks?" Phylan shook his head. "There aren't enough materials for that. 3, maybe 5 at most, hardly meaningful." "Then what do you mean?" Craig asked cautiously. Craig could accept expulsion. There was no way he'd be among those driven out. But an undead calamity meant competing with everyone else for those 3 to 5 reincarnation spots. Phylan let out a quiet sigh and asked with quiet gravity, "Do you know what the greatest achievement of this underground city has been throughout all the years of its existence?" The topic shifted so abruptly that everyone exchanged baffled glances and shook their heads. "Harmony. When everyone first arrived here, minotaurs and goblins were servants, succubi were slaves to humans, and many species were each other's food. Do you know what starving people will do when the food is gone?" Some began to grasp where Phylan was going. Their expressions darkened. It was something none of them had considered. They might scrub clean the little calf that neighbor bull lady just gave birth to and throw it in the pot. They might skewer goblins, season them, and put them in the oven. They might chop off succubus hooves for stew. What Phylan was describing sent a chill through everyone, and yet it was exactly the kind of thing that could happen. Even animals of the same species turned on each other when desperate enough, let alone different races that had once literally been each other's prey. But that history was so distant that only someone like Phylan, an immortal warlock, could still remember it. If you begin slaughtering each other, the undead warlock still living will never again believe in peaceful coexistence. What follows will be a living hell. Humans enslaved and slaughtered, minotaurs fit only to pull carts, succubi chained up and put to use. Better to launch the calamity than to see that. The souls of several thousand should be enough to birth a dozen or so undead or warlocks. At least those dozen souls would have some peace. In the end, Phylan delivered his final verdict. The food supply could last half a year. For that half year, there would be no talk of expelling anyone. Everyone would eat their fill. If no solution was found by then, they would all die together. And they could quietly hope they'd retain their memories and be reborn as warlocks or undead. Phylan had drawn a brutally stark timeline for everyone, but he himself had no desire to see things reach that point. So after the meeting, he quietly came to find me. No matter how far into some obscure corner I had wandered, finding me was easy enough for Phylan, because the entire underground city was blanketed by his informants. Specters stationed throughout every part of the city served as an extremely effective tool for maintaining order. Without such an efficient system, Phylan could never have turned this multi-species underground city into a place where everyone lived in harmony. The moment he saw me, Phylan's face broke into a wide, ingratiating smile. He quick-stepped over to me and said earnestly, "My apologies for the intrusion, my lord. Truly, I would not have come to trouble you if there were any other way. The World Transit Hub has been closed, we have no way to purchase grain, and we have been struggling to hold on for nearly 1,000 years. We are at our limit. I have come to buy grain, and I hope that my lord might be willing to sell us some." Phylan stood with a slight bow, wringing his hands carefully, eyes on my leather wristband. Not a trace remained of the commanding presence he had projected in the council chamber, yet he showed no sign of discomfort with this. The being before him was the Watcher, in all likelihood a projection of the legendary undead king who ruled over all worlds. A little humility cost nothing. Being allowed to speak to the Watcher at all was an honor beyond measure. I tilted my head and stared at him, completely at a loss. Phylan suddenly remembered something and said, as if just realizing it, "Right, the rules require an equal exchange. Here, 10 soul crystals. The teleportation channel has been closed for 1,000 years. I don't know if the old price still applies." The old rate was 1 soul crystal for 200 jin of grain. As he spoke, Phylan reached into his robe and produced 10 black crystals, holding them out to me. Soul crystals? What were those? The same as the crystals used to activate the stone pillars? I wondered, reaching out to take them. The moment they touched my hand, I knew exactly what they were for. Soul crystals are crystallized concentrations of soul energy, the universal currency among undead beings. Different beings use different currencies. Humans prefer precious metals, mages prefer magic crystals, and undead beings prefer soul crystals. Because soul crystals are pure condensed soul energy, they can not only be spent, but also consumed to replenish soul energy. Of course, soul energy is only useful to undead beings, which is why soul crystals circulate exclusively among them. The moment I touched them, I knew how to use them. The same way a human sees water and knows it's drinkable. I looked at the soul crystals in my hand, then at the leather wristband on my wrist, and pressed the crystals against the wristband to begin refining them. The 10 soul crystals dissolved into soul energy, the vast majority of which was absorbed by the wristband. Almost instantly after absorbing it, the wristband lit up. My consciousness was whisked away in an instant. When I gathered myself, I found I was at the archway near the Palace of Rest's farm. I had been sent back, but only as a consciousness, without a body. My mind moved at will. I thought of the fields and my consciousness was there in an instant. The empty fields had nothing in them, not even the birds that used to chirp and flutter about. Otherwise, things looked much the same as when I had left. Looking at the grain piled high in the storehouse, I thought of Phylan. He was trading soul crystals for grain, but how was I supposed to get this grain to him? The moment the thought crossed my mind, the grain sacks within my field of vision began disappearing one by one. A full 45 sacks vanished. Only then did I feel something was off. The sacks stopped disappearing. Where had they gone? I willed myself back, and my consciousness returned. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in the middle of a ring of grain sacks, completely surrounded. Outside the ring stood Phylan, smiling so widely his eyes had disappeared. 45 sacks. A full 45. True, that's 5 fewer than before, but that's quite reasonable. 1,000 years and the price has only gone up 10%. What incredible value. I'll have someone come collect these right away. Phylan, worried things might go sideways if he waited, summoned a crew of skeletons who each hoisted a sack and carried all 45 away in one go. As the area settled back to quiet, I turned Phylan's words over in my mind. 5 fewer sacks. The soul crystals had been mostly absorbed by the wristband, but a small portion had been absorbed by me. Could it be that because of this missing portion, 5 fewer sacks had come through? I checked my soul. It did seem to have grown slightly stronger. I tilted my head and set the question aside. I turned my attention back to the wristband. Responding to my intent, it lit up again and pulled my consciousness in. Had the wristband absorbed the soul crystal energy, allowing me to return here at will? My consciousness drifted back to the farm and storehouse, but I could no longer pull grain sacks through. Stones, however, could still come through. After a few attempts, I realized the soul crystal energy stored in the wristband was most likely tied to weight. Once a corresponding weight had been transferred, nothing more could come through, but perhaps a little under 1 sack's worth remained, which was why the lighter stones could still be moved. The farm had only so much to offer. Over the past 1,000 years, I had come to know every last corner of it. After exploring for a while, the novelty wore off. Just as I was about to withdraw, I habitually glanced toward the Palace of Rest. The Palace of Rest was a place of authority. Even though the king had been gone for over 1,000 years, it remained forbidden ground I had no wish to enter. Previously, desperation had forced me inside to search for usable bones, but I had only dared to rummage around the outer edges. Going deeper had been unthinkable, but now that I could move my consciousness freely, why not try venturing deeper into the Palace of Rest? A bold idea began to take shape. I willed myself forward. Clang. I slammed into something, and my consciousness was thrown back. I came to my senses to find myself blocked just outside the innermost area of the Palace of Rest, the king's chamber of slumber. Some barrier, had stopped my consciousness from entering. I felt nothing in particular about it, neither surprised nor disappointed. I turned and drifted toward the tallest tower to the east. The Palace of Rest was vast, comprising 5 great building complexes. The central area was the innermost core. The other 4 complexes were arranged symmetrically at the 4 corners. The eastern tower was the tallest. My consciousness swept inside. No barrier stopped me. From the outside it looked like a tall tower, but from the inside it was more like a chimney. No floors, no divisions, just a single cylindrical column of space running straight from top to bottom, completely hollow. The only things present were a small lectern placed in the very center of the floor and a book resting on top of it. My consciousness drifted over and touched the book, and found it was made entirely of brass, hard and heavy. At my touch, the brass book flipped open with a sharp snap. A massive apparition surged upward and instantly filled the entire interior of the tower. It was the book's spectral projection. Now I understood why the tower had been built so tall. Without that height, there would be no room to contain the book's projection. The book lay open, its inner pages on display, blank at first. But as it opened, golden characters began to emerge one by one. I tilted my head and stared blankly. Suddenly, a spectral brass dragon appeared. It looked puzzled. "Why is it a little skeleton? Can you even read?" I nodded. "You can't read and you come to a library? What a nuisance," the brass dragon complained. "Fine, I can narrate instead, but that lacks any class. Consider this your lucky day." Then a stream of information poured into my soul and was imprinted directly onto it. Your soul is quite powerful. Why are you only at Greybone level?" the brass dragon murmured, puzzled. I was confused. I didn't understand what it meant, but the characters on the page, I could read them now. The information the brass dragon had imprinted into my soul was the knowledge of written language. The text on the page read, "The Brass Book, all-knowing. One question may be asked per visit. You may ask what you do not know." I tilted my head and asked through my soul, "Who are you?" Finally someone asked this question. Oh goodness, oh goodness. You're brilliant. Simply brilliant. To have thought to ask that. The brass dragon was so excited it nearly leapt off the page. Anyone permitted to enter the library already knew who the brass dragon was, and since the rules allowed only one question, no one would ever waste that precious opportunity asking who the brass dragon was. The brass dragon was the brass dragon. Who else would it be? Well done, little one. You asked the right question. Listen carefully. I am the brass book, god of knowledge, the all-knowing Negress. Negress's voice rang out like a great bell, rolling and resonating through my very soul. I tilted my head and looked at him. Negress craned his neck and peered leered back at me. We stared at each other for quite a while. Negris couldn't hold back. "Have you never heard my name before?" I nodded. "I knew it. What would a little skeleton know?" Negris said. "Don't you have anything else you want to ask?" I tilted my head, my soul conveying a puzzled response. "Wasn't that one question? That doesn't count. That one wasn't a question, it was a reward. Anyone who knows my divine name can call upon it once a day to ask me one question," Negris quickly added. That had originally been a mischievous little trap set by Negris. If someone asked who he was, he would answer, then inform them that counted as their one question. And then, just as they were reeling in dismay, reveal that by knowing his divine name, they could call upon him to ask one question every single day. They had fought so hard just to get into the library and earn their one question, only to discover that one question had become one question every day. That was undeniably a reward. And then he could watch their expressions swing from devastation to elation, a dramatic emotional roller coaster. It was precisely this kind of extreme emotional whiplash that satisfied his mischievous streak. Yet from the moment he was sealed here, through thousands of years, not a single person had ever fallen for the trap. At long last, an opportunity had arrived. Who would enter without first learning who Negris was? As for his divine name, no one had ever thought to care about that. What kind of god gets himself sealed inside a book? Could he really be more powerful than the undead king? Thousands of years had passed, and the one person who finally stumbled into the trap was someone like me, someone who played by no rules at all. Having asked who he was, I genuinely had nothing else to ask. It nearly suffocated Negris. He said helplessly, "Ask another one. I am the all-knowing god of knowledge. There is nothing I do not know." My indifferent attitude was starting to irritate Negris, and he couldn't help urging me on. He was ready to give a truly impressive answer to whatever I asked, to show me the full might of the god of knowledge. I thought for a moment, then asked, "Where did the king go?" The brass book snapped shut, pulling the brass dragon's apparition back inside with it, then rapidly shrinking back down to the physical brass book on the lectern. The space echoed with the furious voice of the brass dragon. "Negris, of all the questions to ask, you pick that one. Negris himself wants to know where the undead king went." An itty-bitty skeleton with such a bizarre personality and such an impossible question, completely uncooperative. I'm done, on strike. I looked at the space, now back to normal, tilted my head, and withdrew my consciousness. The brass dragon's little tantrum had no effect on me whatsoever. I was just a small skeleton. I didn't have that many questions that needed answering. I shifted my focus and was about to drift toward another complex when I felt someone shove me. My physical body had been pushed. My consciousness snapped back and I immediately felt someone shaking me frantically. I turned. It was the little zombie, seeing me respond. The little zombie howled urgently and pointed desperately in one direction. I looked where he was pointing. A flesh-skinned zombie was shuffling toward us from a distance, eyes rolled back, arms stretched wide, reaching for me with clear intent to attack. Does this count as them attacking first? A question rose in my soul. I reached to my waist, drew my sickle and swung it with practiced ease. I don't know how to fight. I'm a farming skeleton, but I have used a sickle for over 1,000 years. When harvesting crops, a single swing is enough to cut them cleanly and lay them down in a neat row. If I treat my opponent like a crop, I can hit exactly where I want. The sharp sickle severed the zombie's neck in a single stroke. The head rolled off and tumbled to a stop right at the little zombie's feet. The little zombie jolted with fright, instinctively clapping both hands over his own neck, eyes wide with alarm as he stared at the sickle in my hand. Equally alarmed was the person controlling the zombie from somewhere unseen. In some dark corner of the underground city, a necromancer in black robes suddenly leapt up from his chair and reflexively grabbed his own neck. The necromancer had projected his consciousness into the zombie. Everything the zombie felt, he felt too. My sickle had a slice through his neck. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but this time it was so sudden that the necromancer had been completely unprepared. He came to his senses and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. When he tried to reconnect with the zombie, the link was gone. And this had been the zombie with his highest affinity. "What kind of rotten skeleton has a weapon that sharp and moves that fast?" the mage muttered. "I have to go see for myself. Better yet, I'll take those two back by force." The necromancer stood up, went to the wall, and pressed lightly. The slowly building magical resonance aligned with something in the wall's structure. A hidden door in the wall swung silently outward. Beyond the hidden door was a long, narrow corridor. Alcoves were set into the walls on both sides, somewhat like the layout of a walk-in wardrobe. But looking into those alcoves, what was stored there was not clothing. It was zombies and skeletons, one in each niche. The necromancer looked left and right, and finally selected a skeleton with slender but pristine, smooth white bones. "You'll do," he murmured. "The bones have some missing pieces and your shoulder blades are a bit deformed, but your bone density is the highest here. You must have been well fed in life." He placed one hand on the skeleton's skull and quietly began to chant, taking control of the white skeleton and walking it out. Esk had always said the underground city was safe. As long as you didn't attack others, no one would harm a skeleton or a zombie. But Esk had only ever seen the skeletons and zombies under Phylan's control. Those could be considered registered undead. Under Phylan's protection, they were safe, and no one would dare harm them. But Esk had overlooked something. Outside, the repose wind howled on. Over the years, many residents of the underground city had died of old age or by accident. Their remains, under the influence of the repose wind, would inevitably give birth to undead. So where did these wild undead end up? As a human, Esk had simply never noticed the distinction between wild and registered undead. Seeing skeletons and zombies everywhere, he assumed all undead were safe. But evil has a way of lurking in the corners even Phelan couldn't see. The little zombie and I had been watched from the moment we arrived. I was an ownerless gray-boned skeleton wandering the streets with no fixed work, the telltale sign of being unregistered. And the little zombie was far too lively, not at all like the dull, sluggish zombie he appeared to be. He looked more like a juvenile warlock. A corpse shaman with intelligence is called a warlock. One without is called a zombie. In terms of both growth potential and utility, an intelligent warlock outstrips a zombie by hundreds of times. A warlock can even be cultivated into a powerful spellcaster. Think about what it would mean to have a powerful spellcaster who obeyed your every command and lived long enough to serve your descendants. What an invaluable treasure for yourself and your lineage. With the little zombie around, a gray-boned skeleton like me was relatively worthless by comparison. The necromancer had come for me first simply to neutralize me before snatching the little zombie. He hadn't counted on how fast I was. One strike, and he lost control entirely. In theory, a worn-down sickle should not have been able to decapitate a flesh-skinned zombie in a single blow. Unable to make sense of it no matter how hard he thought, the necromancer's curiosity got the better of him, and he sent out another skeleton. This time he had no hope of subduing me and taking the little zombie. If he could just figure out what had happened, he'd be satisfied. When he directed the skeleton to where I was, he found a headless zombie following behind me, and the little zombie, diligently hauling rubble. A zombie's soul resides in the chest area. Losing its head doesn't kill it, which is why headless zombies and headless knights are a common enough sight. But you never hear of a headless skeleton. Losing the head greatly weakens perception. The soul must peer out through flesh and bone from the chest, giving everything a foggy, cataract-like quality, unless the soul is powerful enough to overcome that limitation. Besides the three diligently working undead, he also saw Phylan, who had suddenly appeared, blocking his path. That face, livid with fury. "You vermin lurking in the dark corners, I've been too lazy to clean you out before, but now you have the audacity to target my honored guest. Go repent in the realm of death." The necromancer felt Phylan's face cave inward, and begin to spin, sending everything whirling around him as a tremendous suction force dragged him in. He plummeted into a bottomless abyss. The sensation filled the necromancer with sheer terror, and one horrifying spell name surfaced in his mind: Soul-Devouring Abyss. It was a form of mental magic, specifically designed to target consciousnesses that had attached themselves to other bodies, such as mind control projections and undead possession. The success rate was low. It required a spiritual power many times greater than the target's. As it happened, Phylan's spiritual power was more than 10 times that of the human necromancer, and he ripped the man's consciousness out and crushed it outright. In that dark corner, the necromancer in his chair convulsed once, then went completely limp, his body sliding off the chair and onto the floor. With his consciousness extracted, the necromancer was effectively a living corpse. He would never wake again. His body still breathed for now, still technically alive, but if no one found him, he would lie there until he starved to death. Having destroyed the consciousness riding in the skeleton, Phelan let out a shaky breath of relief and murmured, "Thank goodness I kept my guard up. I finally found a new watcher, someone I can buy grain from." If these vermin had scared the watcher away and he chose to watch over somewhere else, this city would be finished. No, I need to declare this area off limits. Nothing gets in here without good reason. With that, he left quietly, paying no mind to the skeleton frame lying on the ground. He couldn't let others disturb the watcher, and he didn't dare disturb the watcher himself either. Before long, the restless little zombie started wandering and quickly discovered the white skeleton. He dragged it back excitedly. He howled at me eagerly. I ignored the skeleton and instead looked at the little zombie with curiosity. A wisp of soul energy was rising from his body, drifting into mine. This was the second time. Earlier, when I had spotted the attacking zombie, the little zombie had clutched his neck in fright, and a wisp of soul energy had drifted from him into my soul. From that first wisp onward, I had sensed, faintly and intermittently, that some kind of mysterious bond had formed between me and the little zombie. The next day I invoked Negris's divine name. The brass dragon's consciousness projected into my soul. I described the mysterious bond between me and the little zombie, and asked what it was. The moment he finished listening, Negris exclaimed, "Impossible. That's a soul bond, but the way you obtained it, it was offered to you by him. A warlock willingly offering his soul to you? That's absurd, you're not the king." I tilted my head. I thought I understood, and then again, perhaps I didn't. So I just stood there, staring blankly. Hey, say something. What's the meaning of ignoring me? Negris was getting annoyed. I tilted my head and said puzzled, "One question." Negris nearly choked. No, that was not a question. I was asking you, did he offer his soul flame to you willingly? Negris asked urgently. I nodded. But, Negris didn't know what to say. "But you're not the king." I stared at him blankly. Negris wrestled with himself for a long moment, then decided it was better to explain fully. Leaving things half-said would be the death of him. Shidor Shock is a warlock. The bond between Zidor and your soul is called a soul bond. Between two undead beings, a superior and a subordinate share a soul-level connection. He cannot betray you. You can control everything about him, his soul, his thoughts, and even destroy him. A soul bond forms in two ways. The first is if his soul was granted by you. Was his soul granted by you? Negris asked. I shook my head, then asked something unrelated. Why is he called Zidorshak? Negris replied impatiently. Can't you read? It's written in the Secret Realm records. The second way is if he made a soul oath to you. Did he make a soul oath to you? Or rather, do either of you even know what a soul oath is? Negris said with a snort. Not to underestimate you and the little zombie, but look at you. Blank as a board. What exactly are you good at besides driving people mad? I shook my head. Negris shook his head with a sigh. Neither situation applies. Then there's only the third possibility. The soul network. But you're not the king. The thoroughly baffled Negris said. You'd best look into it. See if there's an undead shrine that still retains its believers. If your soul can connect to one, then it truly is the soul network. After Negris departed, I pulled the little zombie over and parted his clothing to look. Sure enough, inside the collar were a few characters, Zidorshak. When that human had starved to death, his clothing had still been intact. After becoming the little zombie and running wild everywhere, the parts prone to wear had all been rubbed away, leaving only half a garment still clinging to his frame. The name on the clothing, that must have been the name of the body the little zombie inhabited in its previous life, even though the two shared no soul. The little zombie was simply an undead being that had been born from this corpse. But it didn't matter. It was just a name. At least it was better than little zombie, and less likely to cause confusion. The little zombie, seeing me pull at his clothing, thought I wanted it, and immediately began stripping it off to hand to me. Only when I indicated I didn't want it, did he put it back on. But all the pulling and fussing had left it even more tattered than before. After that, I claimed the area, cleared land for farming, hauled in rubble which I arranged in rows, and laid the glowing moss on top. Glowing moss, tough and resilient as it was, could spread across every damp corner on its own with no one tending it. With someone deliberately creating the right conditions for it, it thrived beyond measure. The furrows of the tilled fields filled in thick, and the surrounding rock walls became blanketed in moss. Step into the area, and everywhere you looked shimmered with a silver glow, as bright as daylight. With ample light now available, I scattered seeds into the raised ridges built between the rows of glowing moss. There's a lot I don't understand, but when it comes to growing things, I am nothing if not experienced. Over 1,000 years of farming lets me read a crop's nature faster than almost anyone. Moss needs moisture but can't sit in standing water, so I laid rubble along the bottom of the channels. The crops can't be too wet either, so they go on the raised ridges. Planting in evenly spaced rows ensures every row gets its share of the light. Yes, I intended to use the light from the glowing moss to illuminate the crops. Whether it would actually work, I had no idea yet. In the meantime, Phelan came by again, giving me 10 soul crystals in exchange for 45 sacks of grain. Then he saw what I had done with the glowing moss, and was immediately stunned. In his mind, I was the watcher. I wouldn't be wasting time on something pointless, so the glowing moss could be used like this. The underground city's greatest problem was that arable land kept shrinking. You needed adequate lighting but couldn't be exposed to the repose wind. Meeting both of those conditions was extremely difficult. Fertile soil, by contrast, was relatively easy. Just put in the effort to dig for it. If glowing moss could provide the light, then that condition was no longer a barrier. The underground city had plenty of places things could be grown. A week later, every seed that had been planted had sprouted. In a dark corner of the underground city, the necromancer's body lay stiff on the ground, dark patches of lividity already setting in, which was actually abnormal. A week on, a normal body would have long since rotted and bred maggots, but he had been a necromancer in life, and had too many preservation measures at his disposal. The erosion of death's aura alone was enough to slow the body's decay. Without warning, a red flame ignited atop the corpse's head. The body jerked upright, eyes flying open to reveal solid black pupils with no whites, while two twisted demonic horns began to grow from its forehead. A low, resonant voice spoke. Useless trash. Couldn't even collect a body without being found out. In the end, the noble Lord Dimas has to come handle this personally. After those demonic words, the horns retracted, the pupils returned to normal black and white, and even the livid patches on the body vanished without a trace. The skin flushed back to the healthy color and elasticity of the living. After straightening himself out, the demon Demas looked himself up and down and gave a satisfied nod. Then he quietly slipped out the door, making his way through a series of winding tunnels and twisting staircases. Demas emerged from a heavy stone coffin. There were hundreds of identical ones here. Meanwhile, Phelan, who had been keeping a close eye on things, wanted to check on how the seeds were coming along. Already stretched thin, he somehow scraped together another 10 soul crystals under the pretext of buying more grain, and came to see for himself. What he saw left Phelan deeply excited. The glowing moss truly could provide light for crops, far better than their current method of using manpower to charge magic lamps, and then using the lamps to illuminate the fields. Even if it only worked to a small degree, the labor savings would be enormous. "My lord, may we use this method?" Phelan asked hopefully. I didn't understand what he meant and tilted my head at him, a gesture that once again startled Phelan. He quickly and painfully produced another soul crystal. "I ask that my lord permit us to use the method you have devised. We will pay a usage fee of 1 soul crystal per month." Now I understood. Using someone else's method required paying a fee. I took the soul crystal and nodded. 1 soul crystal was no small amount. With each transaction I had developed the habit, started from the very first, of absorbing half a soul crystal's worth of energy into my soul. The first time was accidental, the next 2 times it became routine. 1 soul crystal was now stretching across 2 transactions worth. Speaking of soul crystals, I suddenly remembered the brass dragon suggestion. I turned to Phelan and asked, "Is there an undead shrine here?" Phelan, who had just breathed a sigh of relief, felt his soul leap back up to his throat at the question. Should he say yes or no? If he said no, what if the Watcher took offense that such a large underground city had no one who worshipped the immortal? If he said yes, there had once been 2 shrines here, but one had fallen into disuse and become a storage room for coffins, and the other was barely functioning, with nothing but a silver skeleton keeping watch. There wasn't even a priest. What kind of shrine was that? If the Watcher saw the state of it, would he think Phylon hadn't been diligent enough, that he couldn't even maintain the faith of the undead? That truly wasn't fair. The unique nature of an undead shrine was that its worshippers had to be living beings. Undead beings were already soul-branded. They had no need for a shrine. With the World Transit Hub closed, and the undead empire absent from this world for over 1,000 years, even the strongest faith had weakened generation by generation until it vanished entirely. But the main reason was that the undead shrine had always been remarkably laid back. Believers received no rewards, and blasphemers faced no punishment. As long as you didn't stand at the door shouting insults or spitting, and kept a little distance, even mocking the worshippers would get no reaction from anyone. Of course, cursing the king was another matter entirely. Who would dare insult the undead king, lord of souls and immortality? You could flee to another plane and someone would still hunt you down. This easygoing attitude was worlds apart from the Demon Valley, whose demons loved nothing more than tempting and corrupting the hearts of others. Pledge your faith to them and wealth, women, status, power, all could be had in exchange. 1,000 years ago, Phylon had even heard of a religion called the Church of Light. That religion was even more skilled at beguiling people's hearts, but with the closure of the World Transit Hub, they too had vanished without a trace. In a flash, Phylon decided to say yes. After all, it was the truth. Even if the shrine had fallen into disrepair, that wasn't his fault, and deceiving the Watcher would be far worse. Yes, there is a shrine in the southeast corner, Phylon said, then sent me the location through a soul projection. That was one nice thing about undead beings. Communication happened directly at the soul level. Things that were difficult to put into words could be conveyed with a single thought. After receiving the location, I headed toward the southeast with the little zombie. My own area was also in that general direction, but in a branching cave off the main section. It was already sparsely trafficked, but the shrine's corner was in the sloping entry area, part of the main district. When I arrived, I found it equally deserted, not even a specter in sight. The ground was blanketed in moss, slippery and difficult to walk on. But as I crossed into the shrine's boundary, the moss and debris on the ground disappeared entirely. The floor bore the marks of careful sweeping, spotlessly clean. From somewhere further in came the steady sound of sweeping. I followed the sound and rounded a corner, to find a silver-white skeleton, broom in hand, sweeping methodically. Sensing my arrival, the silver skeleton's hollow eye sockets turned in my direction. The little zombie went rigid and slipped behind me. To be honest, this silver skeleton was nearly the most powerful I had encountered in all my 1,000 years. Its soul strength only slightly below Phylon's. It would exert a rank-based oppression on lower undead beings, yet I felt no pressure from it whatsoever, just as I had felt none from Phylon. My gray bone frame had been assembled from bones scavenged at the Palace of Rest, never properly forged through cultivation, so I had no real sense of what rank I was. But since even a silver skeleton couldn't pressure me, it meant the silver skeleton's soul wasn't much stronger than mine. The silver skeleton glanced at me once, then lowered its head and resumed sweeping. The same task repeated for 1,000 years, and perhaps continuing indefinitely. No broom could withstand 1,000 years of use and remain intact, unless it could repair itself. Looking more carefully, the black mist emanating from the broom with every sweep was the silver skeleton's soul armament. A soul armament is a weapon condensed from soul energy by higher-ranked undead beings. It has the ability to grow on its own and repair itself automatically when damaged. Come to think of it, my sickle and hoe had been in use for over 1,000 years as well. Seeing the silver skeleton pay us no mind, I paid it none either, and wandered idly around the shrine. Negris had said to find an undead shrine and see if I could connect to the soul network, which would help determine my situation. But how was I supposed to connect? I circled the shrine with no idea where to start, and called out to Negris again. The moment Negris projected into my soul, he couldn't help complaining. I never imagined that someone who learned my divine name would treat me like a summoned spirit on call, and stop treating my divine name like a reward. Little skeleton, I am not your spirit butler, but there's no soul network in this shrine. I ignored Negris's complaints. Negris sighed. Back when he had been a god in his own right as the brass dragon, those privileged enough to know his divine name had always approached him with trembling reverence, weighing their words with the utmost seriousness before daring to ask a single question. And the questions they asked were either to understand the laws governing the world, or to break through some impossibly difficult magical barrier. Nothing like me, asking about common everyday things every time. It really did feel like being treated as a spirit butler. But what could he do? A rule you set yourself you have to follow, even if it kills you. Negris looked around and said helplessly, how could there be a soul network without any believers? Even the undead flame on the altar has gone out. First light the undead flame, then go find some devoted believers. I made a sound of acknowledgement. Negris had already figured out my habits. He said helplessly, I suppose you're going to ask how to light the undead flame? I'll ask tomorrow. I'm a skeleton who follows the rules. No need to wait until tomorrow. I'll teach you now. You're prepared to spread such a trivial thing over several days? You may have patience, I do not. Negris surrendered. For a god of knowledge to have to spread something this basic over multiple days. It was an insult to his divine dignity. Under Negris's guidance, I lit the undead flame on the altar. A small infusion of soul energy, and the undead flame surged upward. Almost the instant the undead flame lit, the steady sweeping sound that had echoed through the shrine stopped dead. The silver skeleton strode over quickly, and knelt before the altar in almost textbook perfect form, beginning to kowtow. Its metallic skull struck the floor with a resonant clang with each bow. With every kowtow, the undead flame, small as a candle, shot up another notch. I pointed at the silver skeleton and said to Negris, "Believer. That's not a believer. Call it a priest at best. Your king was rather foolish to appoint a silver skeleton as a priest. Did he not know that another name for priest is holy charlatan? Can a dull-witted skeleton talk anyone into anything?" Negris scoffed. "What kind of person can be a believer?" I asked. "Anyone will do. Being a believer isn't about who you are. It's about belief. Without sincere faith, no amount of people matters. Don't go looking yourself. You're a skeleton. One look at you and anyone's defenses go up. How could they possibly trust you? Disguise yourself or find someone else to help." Negris was practically hand-holding me through this. He had never been this proactive even when spreading his own faith. I thought about it, then put on my scarecrow hat. The scarecrow hat was a magical tool designed to frighten birds. It could project an illusion of 2 or 3 things like a hawk or a person. As a low-grade magical item, it wasn't terribly effective. Anyone of comparable spiritual strength could see through it at a glance. But it had one advantage. It could produce sound. I couldn't speak on my own. Even my conversations with Phylon relied on soul projection, so I conjured the illusion of an ordinary-looking man. Not far from the shrine, I spotted a broad-shouldered, stout minotaur woman. I pointed at her and asked, "Will this one do?" "A pig-headed minotaur. If she's willing to believe in you, I'll crawl around like a lizard," Negris scoffed. Minotaurs were famously stubborn, and they only ever believed in their ancestral totems. Getting one to worship the undead was harder than climbing to the heavens. I took out the usage fee Phylon had paid, 1 soul crystal, and refined it, absorbing it into the leather wristband on my wrist. I transferred a sack of grain out and placed it before the minotaur woman. "Do you believe in the undead?" The gaunt, pallid minotaur woman had been picking at some moss. She had 3 children at home, every one of them a bottomless pit who had eaten her into poverty with ease. Fortunately, they were minotaurs. They could eat grass and survive, but this world had no grass. Moss smelled of rot. If she had any other choice, the minotaur woman would never have touched the stuff. The whole family had been reduced to hollow-cheeked skinniness, and if any of them developed a hernia on top of it, that would be a real problem. So when someone placed a sack of grain in front of her and asked if she believed in the undead, the minotaur woman dropped to her knees with a thud, clutched the sack of grain with both arms, and refused to let go, and said with great excitement, I believe, I absolutely believe in the undead. Any position will do. Kneeling is fine. I brought the minotaur woman before the altar. Your faith is sincere. The king bestows grain upon you. Dong dong dong." The minotaur woman knocked her head against the floor with earth-shaking force, loosening the stone tiles in front of the altar. The undead flame blazed upward in great leaping surges. Someone who has gone hungry for years is more devout in the face of food than any believer could ever be. By the 15th kowtow, a wisp of pale blue flame drifted from the minotaur woman's body and merged into the undead flame. At the same moment, I experienced a strange sensation. I felt that in that instant. The minotaur woman, the undead flame, and the little zombie were linked into a single web. Was this the soul network? "You cheated. That's bribery," said Negris, now in the form of a lizard, fuming with indignation. He had been waiting for the outcome the whole time and hadn't left. Whatever rule about only 1 question a day, he'd long since thrown that out the window. I pointed at the minotaur woman, confused. "You said sincere faith was all that mattered, didn't you?" Negris choked on his own words. It was true. When spreading faith, small gestures of goodwill could achieve double the results with half the effort. Even a god of knowledge like him had used the same approach when spreading his own faith. He had handed out badges, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd prize for knowledge competitions, that sort of thing. But dropping an entire sack of grain like this went well beyond small goodwill, and even if it could buy someone's heart temporarily. It hit Negris. I really only needed to win someone's heart temporarily. I had no concept of spreading faith and no interest in doing so. I was simply following Negris's suggestion to verify something that had previously been uncertain. And wasn't that exactly what had just been verified? Fine, you have a point. The soul network has indeed transferred to you. But the problem is, you're not the king, and you have no divine nature. So how did you steal the soul network? Negris couldn't make heads or tails of it. Something even Negris couldn't figure out. I certainly wasn't going to try. I had given the grain to the minotaur woman and was ready to leave. Hey, you're just leaving like that? No consolidating? No expanding? What a waste, Negris called after me. The undead flame has lit the soul network. You've successfully won over a sincere believer, and you're just turning around and leaving? What a shame I'm sealed away. With conditions like these, I'd be more than happy to rebuild another divine domain, the brass dragon said with genuine regret. I can't get more grain out, I said. The 1 soul crystal I just got from Phylon let me transfer 5 sacks. I've already used 1. Trying to do anything meaningful with 4 sacks left is nearly impossible. With faith established, you needn't worry about soul energy. Once you have enough believers, I guarantee you'll have more soul crystals than you can spend, Negris coaxed. He He truly didn't want to let such a good opportunity slip away. More than I can spend? I tilted my head. How much does the brass book cost? What I meant was, how many soul crystals would it take to transfer the brass book out? The question caught Negris completely off guard. You're setting your sights on me now? When you possess divine power as strong as mine, it should be possible. The brass book was the divine artifact sealing Negris. To hold it was to hold the power of the god of knowledge. One who could command the will of a god was called a godbinder. For someone as blank-faced and slow as me to harbor such grand ambitions. But he soon realized I was simply looking for a reference point, and he happened to be that reference point. How many soul crystals is your divine power worth? Under the temptation of soul crystals in unlimited supply, I agreed to Negris's suggestion and continued gathering believers. The method was simple: find the Minotaur woman and repeat what Negris had told me to say. The undead king has sensed the disaster and commanded me to save you. Tell your children, your husband, your loved ones. And you're giving another sack of grain on top of that. How generous, Negris remarked. I also made a point of telling the Minotaur woman, those who guide others shall be given more, meaning those who brought others along would receive extra. These cryptic, grandiose words made the Minotaur woman's head spin, but somehow they gave off a very powerful air. Once she grasped the meaning, her eyes lit up like lanterns, nearly the size of brass bells. 3 children at home, all bottomless pits, never knowing whether they'd eat well or go hungry on any given day. Now believing in the undead meant eating their fill. Of course they'd believe, and if they didn't, Ani Bull would make sure they regretted it. No broken legs needed. The moment the 3 little Minotaurs heard they could eat to their heart's content, their eyes went red and they charged over with the speed of stampeding bulls. Dong dong dong, they kowtowed with thunderous force, and the undead flame they stirred shot up even higher than the Minotaur woman's had. Sure enough, for growing boys, the belief in a full belly was more devout than any faith. But Negris quickly came to regret it. He had promised them their fill, but had forgotten they were Minotaurs. One small Minotaur alone polished off more than a full sack of grain. The 5 sacks of grain from 1 soul crystal, minus the Minotaur woman's sack, were devoured entirely by the 3 small Minotaurs. 1 soul crystal, 5 sacks of grain, 4 devoted gluttons won over. Hard to say if it was a loss or a gain, but probably a gain. Each Minotaur had offered at least 1 flame of soul fire, equivalent in total to 4 soul crystals worth. But extracting that energy required a complex process to convert it into usable soul energy. The undead flame is primed, soul network is flowing. Yes, the energy within the undead flame, direct it to flow into yourself. Try using it to strengthen your soul. Can you feel it? Does it feel like you're growing stronger? Are you sure you're even a skeleton? How are you so skilled at this? Have you practiced before? This is a deeply complex process. Even knowing the method, it takes extended practice to master. Why did you manage it the moment I described it? Are you the skeleton of the goddess of luck herself? When the process Negris considered deeply complex was completed by me on the first attempt, and all the energy within the undead flame had been fully extracted. Like guiding wind, I said, pointing upward. This complex process felt just like when I used to reach my hand out of the pit, to channel the cold energy flowing through the repose wind. Negris had underestimated a starving person's desire for food, even though he had asked to limit the numbers. The shrine was still packed to bursting with people who had heard the news and come running, hearing that only sincere faith could earn the king's blessing. Everyone rushed toward the altar, eager to prove to the king just how deeply they believed, in the undead or in food. The stampeding crowd nearly brought down the long-neglected shrine. The Minotaur woman and her family shouted themselves hoarse and still couldn't restore order. The silver skeleton who had been sweeping reversed its grip on the broom. Black mist coiled around the bristled end, rapidly transforming it into a massive 2-handed cleaver. This was the remarkable quality of a soul armament. It could shift between multiple forms depending on how it was needed. If one had enough idle time and the interest to practice, shaping 100 or more forms was entirely achievable, and with mastery the transitions could be near instantaneous. Cleaver in hand, the silver skeleton leapt with tremendous force, landing atop a stone pillar beside the altar, arching its body and letting out a soul-piercing shriek. The jostling crowd couldn't hear the shriek. They could only feel a force that seemed to freeze their very souls pass through them, roughly like a sudden chill at the back of the neck, only dozens of times more intense. Most people stiffened and shuddered where they stood. As the silver skeleton's eerie grin spread, the ground around the previously open shrine erupted into a fence assembled from white bones, encircling the entire area. Brought to their senses by the silver skeleton's cry, and now enclosed within the bone fence, everyone seemed to suddenly remember where they were. An undead shrine. A place of the undead, not somewhere to cause a ruckus. They fell into orderly lines and approached the altar one by one to kowtow. When they genuinely and sincerely worshipped the undead, I could feel myself and the believers being linked through the undead flame as a bridge, forming a soul network. In that moment, I could even hear faint echoes of what was in their hearts, a truly remarkable sensation. Most of what I heard was, please give me food. A smaller portion was, please grant me immortality, and occasionally there was, please get rid of that fox spirit next door, or please make the repose wind go away, among other things. It made me realize just how complicated the inner lives of living beings truly were. Beyond listening to these inner voices, what mattered most was converting the energy of their faith, a process that gave me the same feeling as being back in my pit, continuously channeling energy into myself. Soul crystals are the condensed energy produced by the souls of undead beings, and because they can be converted back and fed into the soul, other undead beings can use them too, which forms the basis of their value as a common currency and allows them to circulate as such. Any undead being recognizes their value, so this energy could naturally replenish my own soul as well. Before, I hadn't dared use it freely, because I needed it to transfer grain. Now there was so much more. The ratio of grain to soul crystals had reached 100. I could spend freely. Soul energy poured in without end. I could feel myself growing stronger at a remarkable pace. Sometimes change arrives without warning. The soul flame suddenly contracted with great intensity, all the fire rushing inward and forming a pulsing sphere. With each pulse, waves of pure soul energy surged through every bone in my body. Negris noticed what was happening, and said in astonishment, "The soul heart. I said your soul was too dense for a gray bone skeleton. Turns out you were already on the verge of forming a soul heart. Before long your bones will transform into a golden frame. You'll become a golden skeleton king." A golden skeleton king? That sounded formidable. The one who had created my own liege lord was a golden skeleton king. Did that mean I would be able to create other skeletons the way my liege lord had? The undead shrine's rituals became a regular fixture. Any believer who sincerely offered a soul flame received 1 jin of grain, and could return every day. I transferred around 10 tons, roughly 20,000 jin of grain, which was enough to sustain the shrine for a good while. Not everyone was sincere, and not everyone genuinely believed in the undead. Out of every 200 people, roughly 100 were able to offer a soul seal. Those without firm convictions simply didn't come back. After a round of natural filtering, the steady congregation settled at around 200, already a respectable number given that the underground city's total population was only about 5,000. Subtract the races and groups with their own faiths, plus some undead beings, and the potential pool was even smaller. The sudden emergence of an active undead shrine sparked considerable controversy among the underground city's leadership. The succubus Lena even proposed blocking believers from attending the shrine, to prevent it from becoming a destabilizing influence. But the moment the words left her mouth, Esk erupted. "Are you out of your mind? I'm a believer in the undead myself. Are you suggesting I get shut down too?" Esk was a necromancer. What necromancer didn't worship the undead? Lena's heart sank. She had completely forgotten about that. Worse still, she had forgotten who the city lord was. Phelan was an old warlock, himself a member of the undead. Proposing to shut down an undead shrine on a warlock's home turf, Lena felt she must have lost her mind entirely to have suggested such a thing. Phelan knew she hadn't meant any harm and said reassuringly, "Lena only meant well." She was worried a sudden new factor might disrupt the current stability. Lena nodded like a woodpecker. Yes, exactly. That's all I meant. She had only recently joined the underground city, and wasn't well versed in the nature of the undead shrine, but she was catching on now. The undead shrine is simply a place to venerate the undead, Phelan said. Knowing the full picture, there's nothing to worry about. The shrine's reopening could very well become the most stabilizing force in the underground city, and the fact that it keeps distributing grain eases our food shortage. That alone is a tremendous benefit. Treat it as if no one is watching, and leave it alone. Across the table, Craig allowed himself a small smile of quiet vindication. He had known there was something behind Phelan's sudden procurement of several batches of grain. Now the shrine had suddenly reopened and was giving out grain. Anyone with half a brain could connect the two. Only a brainless succubus would blurt something like that out. Seeing that everyone had come to an agreement, Phelan shifted the subject. What came of that idea from the other day, using glowing moss as a supplementary light source for crops? Esk and Lena exchanged a glance, both eventually looking toward Craig. It failed, Craig said. Nothing would grow in the field. If planted too far away, the moss doesn't give off enough light to be useful. It has to go between the crop rows. But it needs a moist environment, and it simply won't survive there. Water it more, and the roots rot, and the crops get waterlogged too. My lord, I don't believe this method is viable. It failed, but I've seen someone make it work, Phelan said. Impossible. When it came to technical matters, no goblin would concede to anyone. My lord, could it be that someone used magic to deceive you, sustaining the crop's growth for a short time through illusion to make it look like it worked? Please don't be taken in, my lord.